22 News Plus studio. This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of InFocus. I am your host, Patrick Berry. I am joined today by Westfield School Superintendent Stefan Czaporowski. Stefan, thank you very much for joining me today. I know it's in the school year, so life is busy for you.
It is, but it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you, Patrick.
Well, I appreciate it. There's a lot to talk about in our local schools. There's so much going on. Life in the world of education has changed since COVID hit us. Now 5+ years ago. It's hard to believe that it's been that long, but there are a lot of things going on in the world of education, but it all starts with getting the job done and budgeting.
Right.
So in today's world, how hard is it to budget to operate a school system?
So I think, the two biggest factors that are increasing school costs are transportation
Okay.
and special education costs. And these aren't small number increases, that they are significant. So, the average contract for transportation, not this past year, but the year before, went up about 30%. For us, it was 36% in particular. And I understand the transportation businesses, obviously their costs are increasing as well, and they have to pass it on to us. But what I have experienced, I would say, in the last several years, since the ESSER funds that came along with COVID have expired, is that the state and the federal government and local governments are having difficulties keeping up with the needs of school districts and the needs of the students in those districts. So,
Are student populations rising or declining or
So-
staying flat?
I would say staying flat.
Okay.
Mainly flat for us now, and probably the larger cities in our area, probably the hill towns, the population is declining. So it's
Okay.
also difficult for them because they receive less funding from the state when their population declines. But if you lose 5 students, for example, you lose funding for 5 students, but that's not enough to close a classroom and lose an
Right.
entire teacher. So it's hard to be able to balance that off. You still need the same number of staff unless you have a mass exodus or mass shrinking of your district. So,
Right.
but so local growth doesn't keep up, and then of course employees want raises, right?
Mhm.
Which as they should have,
We're
as
contractually obligated
contractual,
too.
right? And then you have inflation, which not only affects all of us at home, but affects these schools as well, right? So things that we purchase are now far more expensive. And just to give you an example, I mean, we saw basically a doubling of the price of just chlorine and chemicals
Oh, for the
to
pool.
keep the pool at Westfield High School in
Right.
shape. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but it is when you have a pool that has to be maintained 365 days a year. Um, and in terms of special education, a couple years ago, the state sets the rates for the special education tuition, which is if we send students out of district because we're unable to meet their needs for a variety of reasons, and they go to an out of district school, the state sets those rates. So, one year was a 14% increase, but the amount of funding we received did not increase 14%.
Wow.
And then it was followed by a 4% and a 3%, but the amount of Chapter 70 funding from the state didn't increase accordingly. So those are just expenses that budgets had to take into account for budgeting. But in the end, what ends up happening is you have to make cuts elsewhere to meet those obligations.
So are those cuts affecting a child's ability to learn? So are literacy rates okay? Are they declining? Are they growing?
So they've declined since COVID for sure, and math the same. Has also we've seen math scores decline since that time, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that as well. So when you had a year and a half out of school, our students are now suffering from more anxiety and depression and mental health issues than ever before. And it was significant before COVID, but after COVID, I think it just brought it to the forefront. Um, and so we've had to address those needs. So our literacy scores, though, to go back to your question, have gone down, but we've put in some interventions for students, high intensive tutoring for students that will help them catch up on their reading skills. I don't have enough of those seats, unfortunately, and I would love to be able to offer this program to more students, but we only have funding graciously through the Davis Foundation, actually, that just came in today.
So how much emphasis do you put back on the parents and the families and the and the caregivers of these children to really the impetus is on the school day ends at X time. You at home need to continue these learning processes, read to them. And it's the youngest kids that
Absolutely.
are most at risk. How do you talk to parents and caregivers about, hey, you got to keep this going at night?
So we encourage it, but I certainly can't require it. And I
Right.
think what you'll notice, certainly, we can tell whose parents and caregivers are working with their child and whose aren't. And because they're making progress outside of the school day as well. And so, their performance scores and their abilities are showing that.
And you're able to measure that in testing.
Absolutely. Um, I'm not saying that we'll always get the truthful answer from the parent or caregiver as to how much intervention they're doing, but it can't just be all on the schools because we only have them 6.5 hours a day, right?
Right.
And there are other subject areas we also have to teach that are required, which are all good, but it does take more than just what happens at school for a child to learn to read.
So we talked literacy. Literacy is not really doing all that great. What about some of the other scores? Math, science. We always talk about STEM, science, STEAM. I should say STEAM
Art
because
too, but there's no
science,
test for art, so you don't hear about that too
art is
often.
interpretive. Science,
Yes.
technology, engineering, art, and math.
Yeah.
So where are there yardsticks to measure all of these things?
There are.
Okay.
And the other thing is, so we have our own in-house what we call benchmark testing, and we use either iReady or IXL. They're two programs that students will take 3 times a year, and so we have a beginning and a middle and an end point to see where the student progresses. Now the state, of course, uses the MCAS, right?
Right.
Well, now that the requirement has been removed, I'm not sure how valid that data is going to be, simply because of the fact if you're taking something that's not required, you may not be putting 100% of effort into it.
Mhm.
So to me, our local data is more important, but we still have to look at the MCAS because the state is still assigning schools accountability levels based on your MCAS data and your attendance, which is kind of a mixed message, by the way. But I think I don't know if that'll ever get resolved. I don't think, even though the MCAS doesn't count as a graduation requirement, I fear it is not going away.
Frightening. All right, we need to take our first break. We are here with Westfield School Superintendent Stefan Czaporowski. We'll be right back after this.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Welcome back to today's episode of In Focus. I am your host, Patrick Berry. I am here today with Westfield School Superintendent Stefan Czaporowski, and we're talking about what it takes to educate your children on a daily basis. Stefan, we talked a little bit in the first part of this discussion about budgeting. Give me some for examples. Like what's it take to educate address the needs of a special ed student?
So, particularly with special education, that means that there's a disability. And so the school district is responsible to provide some sort of assistance depending on whether it is, depending on what the disability is, right?
Okay.
So, I think what I'm seeing is the out-of-district school prices increasing not only by the percentage that what the state is saying, but schools are allowed to. There's like what I call a restructuring loophole, where a school can say we've restructured for this year, and they don't have to follow the state set percent increase. They can come up with their own. So there's one school that we work with. We have 5 students going to, and they restructured, and instead of going up the 3% that was allotted for this school year, they actually went up about 50,000-60,000 per student. So now the 5 students automatically, with that increase, causes a $300,000 increase in the school budget
For 5 kids.
for 5 kids. So it seems as though we are required by law, and we want to provide the best education for every student. However, those costs are prohibitive to really any district's budget when they go up at such a huge amount.
Right. So how do you deal with that? I mean, do you have to make cuts, or you have to ask
We
more from your taxpayers?
both, and if you don't get more, local growth hasn't been fantastic
Right.
either, and the economy doesn't look to be getting better. So what will local growth be next year? So what you count on is for a superintendent, you look at your Chapter 70 increase from the state, and then what your local government is going to kick in as well. But if there's very little to no local growth, they can't, without a Proposition 2.5 override, provide that much more funding for school districts.
Let's switch gears a little bit to the atmosphere in the classroom. So I have heard, and it makes national news. Kids are out of control. Behavior in classrooms is out of control. There's there was a stories that made the news years ago that school districts. I think there was one in Western Mass. They had litter boxes in classrooms because kids were identifying as cats or whatever like that. But what has the behavior been like in a classroom? Is it better now, worse now than pre-COVID, post-COVID? What's it like?
So I think one of the long-lasting effects that we're seeing from COVID again is some behaviors that are less than desirable, right?
Okay.
And a lot of that comes from social emotional discrepancies again, which is why we've added so many counselors in our district to try to help kids get through their social emotional needs. I would say it's mixed.
Okay.
And I would say that it depends on the level. We have more kids that are potentially typically dysregulated when they come to us from home.
What do you mean dysregulated?
They don't necessarily know how to interact with other children.
Okay.
And we see that
Social skills not really
social
there.
skills not really there. And I do blame COVID for some of that because for a year and a half we were essentially locked home, right?
Mhm.
And all we had was our technology. So
Right.
we embraced the technology, but we're still seeing that, right? So I think, in my opinion, is that the addiction to technology is causing us to have less social skills and how to interact with other people because during COVID, how we connected was through social media.
Right. So when you get to the hallways in the classrooms of the school, are there more fights now, more
I
negative
wouldn't say there's more.
interactions between students?
There
Or is
are,
it
yeah.
more like kids are just isolated? They don't know how to communicate. They don't know
It's a
how to.
lot of that.
Oh, okay.
They're not necessarily sure how to communicate, and that becomes problematic, right? Because when you're trying to make friends, which is obviously a very important aspect
Absolutely.
of school, because what we're also trying to train you is it's in very few careers are you working in isolation. You're usually
Right.
working with a team of people, so we want you to get along with your peers, and that's really important. I think the whole cell phone controversy is a legitimate issue. But I don't know, what the best way to attack it is. I know I have my own feelings with that, but students, I would argue that students are mean to each other sometimes online or on those social media things, and then it gets brought into school more often than actually at school.
And do you find it gets elevated in the school? Those online interactions,
Absolutely,
or because
because
they become face to face, it lessens.
it can go either way,
Okay. All right.
depending on the students. If someone was offended enough, they may want to take care of it when they see you the next day, based on what you wrote. And the problem with the social media, and I think why people are so heightened and get upset about it is, back in the day, if we didn't have that, so if I called you a name. Typically, you were the only one who heard it, right?
Right.
Now, if you do something on social media, you might get
E-
100, 200, 300 people that
Everybody
see it.
hears it.
So it brings it to a whole new level.
Right.
And so, I think we do see some of that. Less in person, though, because there is a decrease in social skills. And it's not just the kids, I want to point out. I think it's
Adults
adults
as
as
well.
well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But kids are the ones that they want to regulate, which I find particularly
Oh,
interesting.
absolutely. Knowing all that, are our schools safe? I mean, you can only speak to Westfield, but overall, on your superintendent conference calls or meetings, are schools generally safe?
Absolutely. We probably have um, the best protocols, okay, in terms of safety out of any organizations minus Homeland Security probably. But I mean, when you think about because we've been practicing it and drilling it with our kids for over a decade now, and all of our doors are locked, But at the same time, we're also a public school. I mean, we don't have bars on the windows, and you know, I'd never want to see a school built without windows on the first floor
Right, right,
because
right,
of how people get
right.
in. Um, I think it's a legitimate concern given the last 25 years of some of the school violence situations. But by and large, schools are really safe. And I tend to get sort of flattered when other organizations ask us to help them with their safety
Nice.
protocols. What do the schools do? Because we know that it works. And they're not foolproof. Nothing is.
Right.
But we prepare our staff and students for the worst case scenario and how to make it the best case scenario in a bad situation.
Well, we need to take another break. We're with Stefan Czaporowski, Superintendent of the Westfield Schools. We'll be right back.
Yeah, we.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Welcome back to today's edition of In Focus. I am your host, Patrick Berry. Today I'm very fortunate to have Westfield School Superintendent Stefan Czaporowski joining me to talk about the status of our schools as we stand in the school year 2025-2026. Stefan, I want to thank you again for joining me today. A couple of things. One thing that made the news very recently was the cell phone here in Massachusetts, cell phones in the classroom. Explain to me what took place over the course of the summer.
So the legislature passed a bill that would require all school districts to ban cell phones in all of their schools. And again, we have a year to get ready for it. So in my opinion, it's an unfunded mandate, given that if I were to buy pouches, bags, whichever, there's brands I won't say, but it would cost us about $48,000 to operate every school. And the thing about
$48,000 per school.
No, total for our district.
Okay.
But that's still a significant
That's
amount
a lot of money. Right.
And kids have found ways to beat the pouches. Do you have an old cell phone?
Right.
You just throw it in the pouch, you keep your regular one. We're not searching you for it. And if you're smart enough, you just don't get caught having it throughout the day. And then are we banning watches? Because watches are essentially the same thing as a cell phone.
It's just an extension of your phone.
And then what about the student who needs their cell phone to monitor some health condition like blood sugar, which is a thing, right? The Dexcoms or other brands out there that do that. Some students in their IEPs have it written that they can listen to music quietly or obviously with earbuds when they're working independently because it helps them get their work. I don't want to take that away from them. And then there's the part that cell phones can be an educational tool. There's a lot of information available on them, and they can be used. We have a technical high school in carpentry. It can be a ruler. It can be a level, right? And so us old folks also print stuff out, right? In culinary, the students bring up a recipe. They have it on their phone. They put it right in front of them, and they just make the thing based off of that. It was interesting. We had a science fair last year. We have a science fair every year, and it is the best in Mass, just saying. But someone said to me in support of this ban, saying, "Look at all the kids on their phones." I said, "Well, yeah, because their notes are on their phones. They're not on pieces of paper anymore. Like that's kind of old school.
The old trapper keeper isn't
that
around
doesn't
anymore.
exist anymore." And students have due dates and calendars they put on their phone. There are so many reasons to use them. Simply banning them, in my opinion, is short-sighted and doesn't really solve the problem.
Right.
Because
what is the problem? I mean, what are those people who are trying to ban cell phones? What do they perceive the problem to be?
That it causes mental health issues because people are on them for too long.
The social media,
right? But it also
time spent on
when you scroll
products.
through your phone, right? If you last a minute on any particular video or any particular clip, that's a long time.
Right.
What is it doing to our attention spans?
Exactly.
But what I would tell you is this, and I've seen it time and time again: classrooms that don't have cell phone issues are classes that engage students all the time.
Exactly.
Like the rest of us. So, if we're engaged, you're not going to be tempted to pull your phone out. You're not going to be tempted to use it.
So does that put the onus back on the teacher and the instructor to make their program, their syllabus, their whatever, make it more engaging to the student?
I mean, to a degree. I mean, there are some topics I think you can only make so engaging, right? Let's be fair. But if you are keeping the students hands-on and busy, and I think, project-based. And, the education has changed so much, Patrick, since you and I were kids, because we used to have to memorize things, right? Kids have information available at their fingertips. These students don't know what Encyclopedia Britannica is. You and I know because we had to go and look at it, right? And so these students have just information available to them so quickly. And a lot of it can be very beneficial. There are also educational apps on your phone that you could use. Khan Academy, there's an SAT app that helps you practice. A simple calculator. Right. There's so many reasons that these phones are usable, but the problem is we're going on kids for misusing them. But if you go out in the general public, you'll see folks misusing them all the time. It always blows me away when you go to a restaurant and you see a family sitting at a table and all four of them are on their phones and they're not even talking or while they're waiting for their meal. And that is the problem. And, I've gone to meetings where I've sat in the back and a meeting of adults
and you
see the glow up, everyone's on their phone. Right. So, I mean, if we're banning it for kids, when are we teaching responsible cell phone use? And I don't think it's ever going to happen.
And I agree. I mean, just driving around, you see kids in the back seat and the parents driving on the phone.
which is frightening and alone, but
Right.
that's what you're seeing. So, in a way, it feels like we're kicking the can down the road. You're not real, except
You're
for
not
putting
addressing the issue.
you're not addressing the issue. And then there's the part that really people don't like to talk about is liability. In that if we're collecting every student's phone and something happens to one of those phones, now we've collected it and now we've got to pay for the damage. And I
Right.
think the new iPhones are like $1,800.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we don't want that liability. So when do we as a society say bans are not the answer? It's like
Right.
banning books. I know. And
Yeah.
the other thing is if you ban something for a teenager, to be quite honest with you, it actually is a challenge in some
Absolutely.
cases. Like, I'm
Absolutely.
going to do this because you
Right.
say I can't. It's
Hey,
just
I remember my parents, you need to be home by 10 o'clock. Well, I'm staying out till 10:15,
exactly
10:30.
just
How far can I push this? Right.
and that's what kids do.
Right.
I think that there has to be a better way. So we are actually looking at a beacon that would go into a classroom, every classroom, that would control the apps and what kids can do on their phones, but we
Okay.
wouldn't have to collect them. And so a teacher who
That's a
uses
good
apps for their lessons, right? They could use that still, a phone call can come in an emergency, but you're not accessing Facebook, Instagram,
Right.
Snapchat, or any of the social media sites that the kids like to go to. They don't go on Facebook anymore, but that's for old people now too.
Exactly.
But you know what I mean? And I think, to me, that's a better way to be able to do it because if you don't learn, like, work when you're at work, when to use your phone and when not to use, you're
Absolutely.
going to get fired,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
That's
Right.
what
Right. Yeah.
happens. And you don't want to learn it that way.
Right.
And so by banning it during the day, the kids are going to be on their phone from 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock. The average kid spends 5 hours a day on screen time.
Let's stick with technology, but let's switch gears a little bit and talk about artificial intelligence and how that is affecting the classroom and
I
student
really
learning
think AI is going to turn education on its head,
in a
and
good way or a bad way.
it could go either way. But our district this year is we're embracing AI and how we want to integrate it and take advantage of some of the positives that it has to offer. And there are many positives. But my fear is with students, for example, for writing, if you're using Chat GPT, if you have the writing skills to write originally, you can use Chat GPT to clean up something you've
Right.
written, right? But if you've never learned that and you only rely on Chat GPT, that's a problem because Chat GPT isn't always accurate, as we know. But I was involved in a webinar from superintendents on AI, and one of the things that they said that caught my attention is that 36% of teachers are using AI.
Mhm.
86% of our kids are.
Wow.
So we need to we need to get on board so that we know what our kids are doing. And it's not just about cheating. I think you integrate a chat GPT type thing into lessons so that kids know they can use it. Because again, banning something, it really doesn't work.
Right.
And I was a former history teacher. I always look back to Prohibition. They banned alcohol, and more
How'd
people
that work
drank
out?
during that
Yeah.
12-year period than before. So,
Yeah.
you know, just as people, we tend to be a little rebellious, right? And particularly teenagers, that's
Right.
what they do. So, I think we have to find a happy medium, but I think AI isn't going away, and I'm a little I want to say frightened. That's the right word about where it's going to be 5 years from now, because there's so much available to you. I mean, um, it can summarize an email for you. It can add dates into calendars. It can,
Right.
I mean,
It can create vacations for you.
it
Everything.
can.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
But to your point, you need to know, you need to have the skill set of how to ask it the right things. So it's that cognitive decision making
Right.
to be able to put in there to
The
get
right question to get the
to
information
get
you
the
want.
right answer.
Right. But it's phenomenal. It's fascinating. And I've just, I recently discovered you can do things with photos as well. I had a
Right.
photo that I had, but somebody was walking in the middle of an image that I wanted to get. I was just able with AI to erase the person, and it filled in the gaps of the cobblestone street I was trying to get a picture of. It's just I think we're just scratching the surface. And I'm such a rookie at this that I have no idea, but there are other people who are experts at this that are doing so much more with AI than I'll ever know how to do.
Stefan Czaporowski, I want to thank you so very much for your time today. What a
My pleasure.
fascinating conversation to hear what's happening in our local schools. Good seeing you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good seeing you.